Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. As a mental health professional, you care for others, and the Complex Trauma Training Center is committed to caring for you. We are thrilled to introduce our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Therapists often focus so much on learning skills to use with clients that we don't leave space for ourselves. This interactive experiential program offers an immersive learning environment designed to cultivate space for ourselves in our professional role. Together, we will explore in a safe, inclusive, and supportive environment designed to cultivate space for self-care and self-discovery, with the intention to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. We will be exploring the obstacles that stand in your way of being the most present, heartful, and effective therapist possible. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the SPACE program. It's time to care for you. Welcome to a very special series here on Transforming Trauma. We are turning the spotlight toward our amazing CTTC faculty, inviting them to share something we don't often get to hear, their origin stories of becoming therapists. This series was inspired by some deeply honest moments shared during our SPACE program, where faculty opened up about their own therapeutic failures, lessons, and growing edges. The vulnerability and realness they brought sparked something powerful among our community, and we realized how meaningful it can be to hear what shaped the people guiding and mentoring us. So in this series, you'll hear Stephanie, Marcia, and Brad open up about the messy, unexpected, and transformative journeys that led them to the work they do today. You'll get to know them in a more direct way, feeling into their humor, anxieties, aspirations, wisdom, and big hearts. It's a chance to get to know them beyond their professional roles through the same lens of honesty, reflection, and humanity that we strive for in all our programs. We're excited to share this Origin Stories series with you. I hope you enjoy. Marcia Black is a licensed psychologist, faculty member at the Complex Trauma Training Center, and a trainer and master therapist in the neuroaffective relational model. Marcia has been in private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area for over 40 years. She specializes in treating complex and developmental trauma in individuals, couples, and intergenerationally, as manifested in parenting issues. Outside work, adventures in nature, and time with young children are among Marcia's greatest pleasures and influences. Mentoring students and training assistants and nurturing our growing community of graduates committed to ongoing professional and personal development is a passion she brings to CTTC. In alignment with the mission of CTTC, Marcia's mentorship is relationally focused, inviting exploration into therapists' inner experience and supporting their own growth alongside that of their clients. Please enjoy this conversation with Marcia Black. Okay, I am here with Marcia Black. So happy to have you back. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Thanks, Emily. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah. And this conversation today is part of a series. And so I'm just excited because I know a little bit of what's coming up, that we're going to get to know you better. But I would like to check in with you around what you would like our listeners to come away with from our conversation today.
This whole theme kind of came out of initially our first space class, where we actually posed the question to the students around their own kind of origin story about becoming a therapist. And it was so powerful to hear people share. It was like this window opened up into their inner landscape, and we all got to enjoy that. And from there, we've recognized how powerful it can be. So for me, what I would love people to take away from our conversation and the series of conversations is just to have their own curiosity about their origin story. Because as I was thinking about some of the things I might want to share, more things came than I even realized that were impacting me in my choices and my direction and why I love what I do. So I'm hoping that just sparks curiosity for our listeners to think for themselves about how they got here, and what they're doing today, and the way that they're doing it, with whether it's with adults or children or any sort of therapeutic work.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I feel like that leads really well into me just asking you about how you got into this field.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't think I ever considered being anything other than a therapist. I don't remember ever having any other different ideas. My dad and my aunt were both psychologists, although I think the influences were long before I knew that about them. I'm the oldest of four children. My mom had twins when I was, I think, 16 months old. So I was busy in some sort of caretaking, I think, from a pretty young age.
Hmm.
And I was remembering something I think when I was around 3 years old, my grandmother, probably in some effort to give me something to occupy myself while my mother was occupied with the twins, gave me a set of records called The Little People. I still have them. They're 70 plus years old and scratched up, but I've had them digitized. And they were all to classical music. They're about this guy named Mr. Human who would, on each little episode, go to the park and either, fall asleep on the bench or sit on the grass. And then he'd suddenly hear some little voice of a bee or a squirrel or a grasshopper. And the next thing that would come is, and I knew I was in the land of enchantment. Later, I wondered, whoever did these, were they early psychedelic users or something? But in each little episode, when he would go into the land of enchantment, and they had titles like The Aviator Bees or The Grandfather Grasshopper, there was always something that happened where something befell these little creatures. And Mr. Human would, repair the broken ankle of the squirrel, or he'd help the bee that had been told he can't participate in the Fairy Queen Ball because he'd been a, quote, bad bee by stealing other people's honey to get back into the good graces of the queen bee. And I was fascinated with all the helping. I mean, I
Mm.
must have listened to those records over and over and over again. And every story was about the helping. And at the end of each episode, he would do something like clap his hands excitedly, and then he would be out of the land of enchantment. So I think, along with the family dynamics and then the kind of trajectory of service in our family, my mother was also, very much involved in volunteer work with special needs kids. And then my sister was born when I was 7. And that I might as well have been her mother as far as I was concerned. I was just fascinated with her development, playing with her, helping her grow. I mean, I would say she's probably had a huge impact on just my nurturing tendencies. And, went on from there. I started babysitting at a really young age. And I think I had a deep curiosity about people and what made them tick. I must have read every single biography in my elementary school library. I don't know if you had those things. In my era,
Really?
there were all these little blue biographies of
Uh-huh.
all of these historic people. And of course, I graduated from that into other
Yeah.
memoirs and so on. But I was also fascinated with the pioneers. Like, how did things get made from scratch? And with archaeology, like trying to
Mhm.
understand how
Mhm.
do we explain what we see here from what happened a long time ago? I have on my office here a photograph of Mesa Verde, and I've probably seen 75 to 80% of the ruins in the Southwest, just with great fascination for who were these people and, how did they live these lives and what made them leave. So even geology, the layering was fascinating to me when I was in school. So all of this sort of, I think, converged in just a deep, deep curiosity about what makes people tick. And of course, probably woven in there was what made me tick, trying to
Mm.
figure things
Mhm.
out there. And how did things become what they are? And then helping,
Yeah.
again, part of which I'm sure was strategic, was very useful for me to be a helper in my family with that
Sure.
many children. But I also got a lot of satisfaction out of, especially all of my many interactions with children. And when I first started my education in psychology, I was very focused on working with kids. That was, my plan, and I did quite a bit of work with kids. It really wasn't until I had my own kids that I shifted away from working with kids because the schedule didn't work as well.
Mhm.
Although I think in some ways, there's no better learning for working with adults than working with children.
So again, listeners, this is something we were chatting about a little bit before we pressed record. But first of all, I didn't know this about you. I didn't know that you started working with kids. So that's so interesting to me. But then also, why is that? Why do you hold that as a great training ground? Can you speak more to that?
With kids, you mostly do play therapy, although I did quite a bit of work too with autistic kids. I don't know if you ever read that book. I did whenever it first came out, called Dibs in Search of Self. It was like
No.
one of these books that talks about, I think it was an autistic kid and kind of his journey and all of that. But when you're working through play, you're reading between the lines. It's less what the kids say and more what they do, what toys do they pick? Why? What's the narrative that they're creating? How to kind of read the story they're trying to tell you about their internal landscape through how they're relating and how they want to play things out with you and what parts they give you to play. So the nonverbal aspect of it, I think, has a really big impact when I'm with adult clients, where I'm very attentive to the feeling tone, what's going on relationally. I think, Listening with the Third Ear was a book that Theodore Reich wrote when I was in graduate school. And it's the same idea, listening, but also what's going on in the room. What's the feeling tone? Moving closer or further away. All of these elements of relating that aren't always verbal are part of what working with kids really taught me. And sometimes when I'm with adults, I'm also feeling, what's the age of what's showing up here right now? Is this like a young self state? Is this an older self state? And I think that's also really helped me to feel that level of being tuned into, oh, no wonder I need to slow down now. This feels like maybe even there's no words here. I have a lot of comfort with that in my clinical work. And I learned a lot from my own kids. Probably I've learned more from my own kids and being a parent than I have almost from any training program. Because, you see them in their authenticity and, the way that they relate to themselves and their feelings and what they need from you as a parent. There's a lot of parallels to therapy. Obviously not exactly, but certainly if we're working with individuals as adults who've had to disconnect from parts of themselves as children, it's really helpful to know about children.
Yeah. This is really, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but this is really making me think. This is like giving Mr. Rogers vibe. That's one thing I love about that show. I enjoyed it as a kid, but watching it back, when my kids were little, learning some of these things that you're talking about, like the observation, learning so much from observing and making space for that quiet. And I think I can really hear that in what you're sharing, that translates to working with adults. Like learning that kind of a training ground with kids is a really rich way to remember to slow down and create that space with adults.
It's also so relational. It's not so intellectual. Like I spent time once with a child whose father had burns on his feet from actually rescuing her from a fire that started in her room. And while he was recovering in the hospital, I spent a lot of time with her, and she would play that over and over. She was about 3. So you be the daddy, and then we'd play it out. And no, you be the baby, and I'm going to be the daddy. It's so relational. And then you're just feeling together, oh, here's what I'm feeling, here's what you're feeling. And I think so much of our work is relational. I mean, we have the words that we exchange, but it's really the relational field that is so much a part of the healing. And I think with kids, a lot of times the words aren't even available, to express what's going on with them. So the enactment and the collaboration in the experience of the healing is so much more front and center. But I think it's more there with adults than we often, realize. The being with, as opposed to, intellectualizing or figuring out and doing too. And that's really so much a part of working with kids.
Yeah. So you said you were interested in this work as a young child, a young person. Do you have memories of kind of your first encounter with what therapy meant to you? Or I'm curious to hear.
I think I did volunteer work
Mm.
with kids from a young age. Like my mom worked at this, it's still there I grew up on the Stanford campus, a special center that special needs kids went to. So I would go over there and help out sometimes with her. And I just found it really satisfying. And I think, touched me in a lot of ways. My first experience in graduate school was working with autistic kids, pretty severely autistic kids. And we had, use sign language and things like that. And then I had in some of my, clinical internships, a range, obviously, of training that included some sand tray therapy and play therapy with kids. So, but babies, I love babies. I still love
Yeah.
babies. So there's just something, the developmental piece, realizing how much goes on from such a young age has also really impacted me working with adults because those wounds can start even before they arrive. When parents
Mhm.
project onto their unborn children, they don't ever get seen as who they are. And
Mm.
to be with and see how much is going on from day one relationally with an infant and then a young child has informed my work with adults so much.
Mhm. So you mentioned doing this play therapy, sand therapy. Were there any influential teachers or like
Mhm.
folks in your program that kind of guided you to see through this lens? Because I don't know, and maybe this just varies from program to program, but
Yeah.
I know a lot of folks don't get that kind of experience the way you're describing it.
Yeah, I had some training in the sand tray therapy from a Jungian person who was also taught us hypnosis, one of my first internships at Kaiser here in Vallejo. But my most influential mentors were really more in the adult landscape.
Mhm.
Um, Hal Sampson, who passed away a few years ago, along with Joe Weiss in San Francisco, developed a control mastery approach, which is a relational analytic approach, kind of a more, shall we say, updated version of psychoanalytic work. Was a really powerful person in my development when I was in training and afterwards. And it's actually very NARM aligned in a lot of ways. It focuses on what goes on in child development impacts the sense of self. They talk about it as pathogenic beliefs. We talk about it more survival strategies.
Mhm.
But he also emphasized, the relational frame. He sometimes would talk about it, treatment by attitudes, that clients come in, as we talk about in NARM, with an intention to master and heal these adaptations to their developmental trauma. And they have their own terminology around sort of the way they test those beliefs with us. But we would look at it very similarly. The clients bring what's in the way of what they want for themselves in the form of strategies that we have to not get caught up in and have to hold space for and not try to fix. So it was very, very aligned with what NARM brought into focus later in my career. And his emphasis on the relational part was really powerful for me as opposed to, and also being more in it. The analytic tradition was very much, even with kids to some degree, more, we're neutral, we're a blank slate. And the control mastery people that now are part of the San Francisco Psychotherapy Research Group really brought in the analyst as a real person that is in the work in a meaningful way and not just there to be projected onto.
Mm.
So, and he was certainly an important mentor. Later on, I spent quite a bit of time learning from Peter Levine. I got involved in learning somatic experiencing. That came out of a trauma of mine where I had a hand injury and wound up in a workshop with him in which he did a piece of work with me around my accident that was so powerful in one session to see kind of the
Wow.
level of healing that happens on the body level. So we
Mhm.
had this sort of more top-down influence from the control mastery people built on the, early child work, and then coming in with a somatic level of realizing what goes on in the nervous system and somatically that is also a level at which trauma is processed. But they really came together when I landed in NARM. The best part
Yeah.
of the somatic experiencing work was that I met Brad in the advanced training, and we had quite a bit of fun in the years that we did assisting for the Somatic Experiencing Institute and really got to know each other at a deep level. But from there, we went on to take the NARM training together, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Stephanie was part of that, so the three
Yeah.
of us met then and went on to where we are today.
Mhm. One thing I'm just so appreciating about both what you're sharing and also what Stephanie has shared is I'm just really appreciating like the eclectic kind of nature of I don't know, I have this funny image of like picking up little pebbles like, "Oh, I like this one. This one like is really pretty. I can appreciate." And then bringing up the next piece and like it creates this really beautiful, holistic approach that both you and Stephanie have named that NARM kind of pulled in all these different things that you were interested in and brought them into one place. And I'm just appreciating because I think I've always held or I've often held kind of my path as like eclectic and weird. And you know what I mean? Like I'm bringing all these random things together and I guess this is where I am. But the way both you and Stephanie have shared is like there's an intentionality that brings everything together. And I'm just really appreciating the way that you're sharing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many elements to it. I was also a child of the 60s. And,
Mhm.
we were doing a lot of not just, contemplating our navel or,
Yeah.
going to rock concerts and hearing amazing music and experimenting with psychedelics. We were doing a lot of like deep thinking
Yeah.
about the meaning of life and who we were and trying to understand ourselves in a deep way. And there's this trajectory here of wanting to be a psychotherapist that never really wavered. But these elements really had an impact in, the way the journey unfolded and probably why it anchored more and more in place over time.
Mhm.
So it's been interesting to think about the trajectory of my life and how it related to the choice I had. There's a profound curiosity about who we are and, what makes us, humans together on the
Yeah.
planet, what connects us, what disconnects us.
Yeah.
I had a period of life during college where I took some time off and I lived on some land in the western part of Massachusetts with some friends. And we went back totally to like we built cabins, we raised bees, we did everything from scratch. That was
Wow.
why I just always wanted to do what was in the Laura Ingalls Wilder books.
Yeah.
But as I think about it now, it also was part of this
Yeah.
wanting to know where things come from, wanting to have my hands in the dirt, wanting to be in it experientially and to understand sort of how did we get here today? Going back through all of the intergenerational landscape, not just with individuals, but just even culturally,
Mhm.
historically. And that had a huge impact on who I am today. Just the sense of connection to the earth and nature and the tribe, because it had to be a very cooperative experience
Right.
to live that way.
Yeah.
And that's still very important to me. It's like we have our
Mhm.
NARM
Mhm.
community, and it's a huge part of what nourishes me in being a part of the faculty and in the mentoring program.
Mhm. That's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm feeling touched even just hearing you talk about that. There's something about the way that you named like being in the land, having your hands in the dirt, like being a
Right.
human on that level, like helps us
Mm.
understand a bit more about ourselves and how we as humans came to be the way we are. And that changes how we relate to ourselves and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So you have all this rich background. You did the somatic experiencing training. Was there anything else that shaped your path in that way?
I think for a lot of us, we're drawn to this also for our own healing. And
Mm,
so for me, I mean, I went to a graduate school that required psychotherapy of your own. And
love that.
I think it was 45 hours, which to me seems like a joke now because I've been through so much.
Yeah.
But I have certainly been impacted by all the personal work. I think sometimes we're drawn, at least a part of us, or even unconsciously, are drawn to this work for our own healing. And if we're lucky, we figure out that we need to do our own healing to do the work. And so I spent lots of time in, just psychodynamically oriented therapy, a number of years in psychoanalysis 3 times a week. I had a period of being in Reiki therapy.
Really?
I've had, I feel really fortunate that I've been able to work with people that are talented and gifted and, hypnosis. I have a person that I worked with in that way who was very supportive in
Mm.
certain parts of my life. And then the somatic work was very powerful, going through a lot of the surgery and the aftermath of this accident I had that I injured my hand in. So all of that, including norm therapy,
Mhm.
and now I'm actually working with a Jungian kind of, it's so interesting at this stage of my life, a very relationally oriented Jungian who certainly is aligned with NARM. But, the journey sort of into the more transpersonal realm, the, dream world has been very meaningful for me in these last couple of years and sort of going forward. So I feel like the other part of the journey really has been my own personal growth,
Mhm.
from the very first time I set foot in a therapist's office to getting online once a week now.
Yeah.
I don't think I could, do this work in the way that I do it without looking at what is evoked for me on a, day-to-day basis in how I'm impacted by the relational field with my clients.
Yeah. I love that. I know maybe 45 hours seems like a joke, but there's part of me that's like, well, by the time you've been in therapy for 45 hours, you probably know that there's more to do. Whereas if someone goes for 3 sessions, they may not quite have gotten to that layer yet where they know, oh, yeah, there's more here. And I don't know of many programs that require anything like that. And I think that's really sad, but I'm glad to hear that that was part of your experience.
When I was applying to graduate school, which was, when was that? 1972 or 3? I started in 74. I wanted a clinical program. Most of the programs were academic, they were in universities, and they had just started these freestanding graduate schools in clinical psychology. And I think the one I went to, California School of Professional Psychology at the time, it was called, was one of the first. And so my dad actually encouraged me to look at that kind of a program over, a traditional like UMass psychology department program. And it was totally in alignment with what I wanted. They had growth groups you participated in.
Really?
You had to do them. So you'd be in a group and, working on whatever you worked on with your student peers. And all of the classes were on clinical things like group therapy classes and, George Bach's couples therapy. I don't know if you
Really?
remember that it was much more cathartic.
Yes.
But in any case, it was very much about learning clinical work. I had to write a dissertation and I did. So there was a research element to getting my PhD. But even that was a lot more spacious in terms of what you could do.
Mm.
So I feel really grateful that I wound up in a program like that that really valued not just a clinical focus, but also the growth of the students in their own
Mhm.
personal work.
Mhm.
And of course, that's what the space program is all
I
about.
know. I was like, that's a nice lead
Um,
in. We got to talk about that maybe at the end. Give another little plug. I'm holding, because you've mentioned your dad a few times now. And so it sounds like obviously his influence has meant a lot in your, that trajectory.
in many, many ways, right? I mean, he was certainly an inspiration in terms of, I looked up to him a lot. And I never really knew much about his clinical work because from a lot of my growing up years, he was in an administrative position as the director of the counseling center at Stanford. But he did have a clinical practice and he was involved in getting licensure in place in California in the very, very early days. So he knew the person who had started the school and was able to support that. And he did help me out in certain ways, getting
Mm.
connected up with people who I might enjoy working with. There were also some challenges in having a father who was a psychologist. He used to write articles and was interviewed, and even someone wanted him to write a book, which he never did get to, on the generation gap. And by the time I was in college, I was like, how come you didn't do better with us? If you have all this great advice. I mean, I think he had blind spots with his own kids. He could be
Mhm.
certainly hard to please at times. And as much as I admired him and looked up to him and tried to please him, I also was impacted by the challenges to sort of live up to his expectations. Um,
Mhm.
In fact, as I was sharing with you earlier, the first time I went to see a therapist was my first year of school at Stanford. And I had actually taken that year off and gone back east and sort of started that whole farming thing, but then came back. So I was still a freshman at that point. And I was trying to figure out a lot of things about myself and a relationship that I had just ended with somebody. So I, marched myself over to the student health center and got an appointment with this psychiatrist. And it was so funny what came out of it. I found a letter recently that I wrote to my dad. I think it must have been just a couple of days after that session. That was just hilarious. And I thought I would maybe read a little quote.
I was just going to say, let's hear it.
Because he was a psychiatrist, not a psychologist.
Okay.
I only saw him once for an hour and a half. So I come back from the psychiatrist and I write to my dad. And at that time, I was actually living with my parents because I hadn't yet kind of gotten into some student housing. So back in my own family house. So I write to my dad, who was just a few rooms away, but in those days, sometimes writing was easier. My visit to the psychiatrist, about which I was super anxious and uptight, there we go with a language from the 60s, was an attempt to grasp out for something to help. I mean, I can intellectualize about my hang-ups, that's another word from the 60s, just fine. But it stopped there, and I didn't know why I had them or how to get rid of them. Here's the thing about getting rid of our strategies. Well, I told Dr. Jones about my life since I met Mike, my boyfriend that I had just left, as much as I could in 1.5 hours. And he wound up telling me I was doing okay. But what I really needed was to talk to my father right now. Fine thing. At least he helped me realize more fully what a lot of my actions over the past 2 years are related to in so many ways to my relationship with you. So much has to be straightened out with you in my eyes. So that's my takeaway from my first therapy session ever, was go talk to your father. How was that?
Wow.
And he would engage sometimes on those levels. He was a man, very thoughtful. So sometimes you had to wait for him to gather his thoughts, but he did the best he could. But, he had his own challenges in his family of origin. So I think it was sometimes hard for him when his kids were having issues to know exactly how to show up for them, though he could do differently with his clients and his employees. So, but that was the beginning, and it was just a journey of trying to understand what made myself tick, really. Why did I do what I did? That I think ultimately drove a lot of my psychological studies over the years.
Wow.
I'm sure there are a lot of people listening that can relate.
Yes. I was just thinking, I was like, I went into my own thing as you were reading. I was thinking of, my own life and really resonating with that. And just, again, hearing, that there's all of us have like this multiple powerful experiences that bring us to the work that we're doing. And I really appreciate you, sharing so openly something that's kind of an intimate thing, a letter to your father.
It was interesting too, when I read it, this idea about getting rid of my hangups, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I so love actually about our model, is that that's not what we're doing. We're really trying to welcome those parts. Of course, I was 18, had no idea what I was getting into in the field of psychotherapy. But I love the way that we talk about making a relationship to our strategies and our client strategies, not trying to, clients come in often wanting to get rid of their dissociation or their procrastination or their, low self-esteem. And what we really do is want to get to know more about that and how that's even supported them in a lot of ways, rather than taking sides one way or another, so that they're able to hold their relationship to those parts differently in a way that something else becomes possible.
Yeah. Really opens it up.
Yeah.
So you shared that was kind of one challenging moment in this path to becoming a therapist. I'm curious if there's any other challenges or obstacles that kind of jump out in your mind.
I think I would have to say I feel like really blessed in that my path had a lot of grace in it. Things worked out. I mean, obviously, one has to finance their education, but I did get a lot of support from my family. Whatever contributions they had to the quote unquote hangups, they did really believe in education and supported all of us in going towards what we wanted. And I just had wonderful teachers, mentors that have stayed a part of my life through all of these years. Some of them, the head of the school that I went to when I was there became a dear friend and wound up, being the officiant at my wedding to my husband, who I also met in graduate school.
Oh, wow.
And he's in his 80s. He's still a part of my life. We have him over for dinner when we can. And so I've had like wonderful people. And some of the people I went to school with are still part of my life. And we get together and talk about our work and our cases. So it's definitely more than a career. It really is kind of a huge part of all these different threads in my life. And of course, my oldest son, who always said when he was in high school he would never be a therapist like his parents, is also now a therapist. And we have a great time sharing our work, our journey, our cases, NARM, etc. So that's been really special. So yeah, I have been very fortunate to have a lot of support, the current flowing in the right direction for me to be able to continue to do this. I can't imagine doing anything else. I feel a lot of gratitude that I wound up here because it's so fulfilling in so many ways. And it's so much a part of my own growth and development. And I would have to say in these last 10 or more years, being part of this journey with NARM and the center has been, I really came to it at a time when I could have been retiring. And
Right.
it's probably been the most enlivened I've been in my work the whole time.
I love that.
So that's been really, really, really sweet. There was a time I remember this almost as a joke where I would think to myself, why didn't I choose something that you could have the results of it? Like,
Yeah.
if you're a typist, you type the letter and you can see are there mistakes. And it's interesting to think about that now, because I think it was certainly, if we put it in the context of how we think about work in NARM, a time when I was more focused on outcome, like getting people somewhere. And I can't imagine thinking that now, because I realize what I'm much more focused on is more how I'm showing up. And that is something that I actually have more agency over, not on some specific outcome for a client. And so it's also sort of a marker of my own growth to have sort of left those thoughts behind. And I think, people coming into the field sometimes do feel like it's so hard to know how you're doing. You don't always get that immediate feedback because there's expansions and contractions and all of that. But if you're doing your own work, like we're now really emphasizing in the space program, then you're focusing on something that you really can continue to experience your own progress and growth in a way that you're, less needing this external validation of, oh, check the box, the client did X, Y, or Z, because, you're in a co-created journey together. I really think about therapy as sort of a collaboration, like you're on a trail together, maybe you have a compass or a flashlight, but you're really trying to figure it out together as you go. So it's not like I have all the answers and, we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah. I'm just appreciating the way you've been describing, the relationships, the mentors that you've had, all the folks that are in your circle, and how those relationships are really feeding something for you. Like they're nourishing, not just your work, but like you as a human, you as an individual. And I just think that's something that, what I'll just say is I've seen, I'm in some Facebook therapist groups. And oftentimes when someone is naming their burnout or I can't do this anymore, I don't know how to sustain it, I mean, what you're describing, I think, is the antidote to that, because often what I kind of witness or, what is shared is that there's a lack of what you're describing and like a lack of space for all of this. I mean, I don't know. I don't really have the language for it, but just that space to really be in the moment and not have a destination or the right answer. That I'm just thinking of the times that I've felt like I needed to arrive somewhere or have an answer. That's when I feel like I'm hitting my head against a wall. That's when it feels like
Oh,
it's so
yeah.
draining.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what draws a lot of people to our community is
Hmm.
the relational opportunities in the
Right.
community and to be humans together, to be vulnerable together, to experience that heartfulness
Yeah.
that is also, kind of a hallmark of a lot of the NARM work itself, but extends into the community that we bring and support each other with. That is, I don't think it's a lot of places.
No, it feels really special.
A lot of therapists are very isolated. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like here we are right now having this.
Yeah. And like right now, this moment, this just feels so nourishing. And it just, because there's hard things in life. So it's not like but this kind of interaction, this being in the moment with each other is so nourishing. And gosh, I can't, imagine doing anything else either now that I'm doing this work. And I've had kind of an eclectic way to be in this place, but I feel like I've arrived, I've come home to a place that feels natural.
You've had some of the same varied influences, right? You've worked with
Yeah.
mothers and children and so
Hmm.
on. One of the trajectories for me regarding the working with children thing was as I learned more and got more in depth and really understood, more and more about child development, it became clear that the people to work with are their parents more than the
Yes.
kids. I mean, I love the work with kids. I could
Yeah.
spend any amount of time with them, but maybe it was an hour or 2 a week, and the parents are with the kids for hours. And so NARM has actually been a great tool, so to speak, or a great approach, I guess is a better way to say it, to working with parents and supporting them in what's in the way of them being able to show
Yes.
up for their kids in a way that their kids don't need therapy.
Yes.
And that's been really so rewarding for me because it's addressing the problem where the problem starts in the
Yes.
very early relationship with infants and parents or parents and older children, where they, in doing their own work, get to experience much more satisfying and meaningful relationships with their children.
Mhm.
And feeling like that actually has ultimately a greater impact on the kids than just the
Mhm.
individual work.
I feel the same. I feel so much the same. And in my program as an MFT, like I did see kids in my internship and stuff. And that was what as soon as I graduated, I veered toward, I just said, I love the kids. It was always enjoyable. It was a fun hour being with them and getting to know their world and what's happening for them. I always really enjoyed that. I mean, sometimes it was heart wrenching, but I did always, I was one that I would often bring the parents in and do more of a family kind of work because I recognize, just as you're saying, like we can support the parents and having, a different relationship that often resolved a lot of the things that the kids were going through. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I wonder, I'm mindful of the time. So I just want to check back in and just see if there's anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners about your origin story.
I mean, I think the landing in the space program probably
Yeah.
speaks to kind of the highlight for me of where we are in the center, creating our own kind of new trajectory here. But also, I think as I look back on all, and I've had the good fortune to learn from some awesome people. I got to study for some time in person with Milton Erickson. I got to learn from James Masterson. I
Wow.
did some training with Davinlu and a lot of people because they were around
Yeah.
people, the Gestalt people that
Hmm.
were the family therapy systems people. But in my experience, what underlies all of the approaches is how we are in them. That if you're not connected to yourself, if you're not aware of the ways that you get pulled in and it happens all the time. I can
Right.
just look at a day of work and go, "Oh, there it is. Okay, step back? How can I look at a blind spot there or see where I might have missed something? Not to beat myself up, but really to further my own growth. So the space program has come out of our belief that no matter what approach you're using, if you're doing it without taking a look at your own sort of deep part in it, it's going to be less effective. So it feels exciting to be in the creation of something that for all therapists can really support not just the quality of their work, but also just the enjoyment of their work, where the opportunities to continue to learn and grow when you hit those blind spots or what seems like impasses or places where the countertransference comes up. And it doesn't every model. It's just that some of them don't make room to look at it. And so we're hoping, I think, to bring more and more people in who are interested in that deeper layer, whatever approach they're actually using. And that's, to me, I think, one of the greatest learning. It's less about the skills and more about who we are when we're with our clients and how much of ourselves authentically we can bring into the work that we're trying to support people exploring and getting connected to in that program. So
Yeah.
that's super exciting for me.
Yeah. And if there's folks listening, like if this is their first episode, they haven't heard any other episodes, we do have an episode where we talk all about the space program. But what you're describing, Marcia, is so folks don't have to be trained in NARM to be a part of this space program, that it's really about this therapist development. And you and Stephanie and Brad do such a beautiful job of bringing the humanity and all of this richness into that space. And it's such a joy to be a part of it. So anyone who is interested about what Marcia's describing, you can go check out that episode, that space episode.
Yeah, more to come on that.
More to come.
Brad is prolific in his creativity, and
I love it.
We're all enjoying being a part of our creation. So
yeah, and I imagine every year there's going to be like a new iteration and new things brought in, which is so exciting to be in something that feels so alive, growing. I love it. Well, this has been just such a pleasure, Marcia. Thank you for sharing with us, kind of your beginning spot and where that's bringing you to. One of the things that I've really enjoyed in our time just getting to know you is this vibrance that you bring to a space. And, you've alluded to your age a little bit. Like people could probably do the math and figure out how old you are. But if they see you in person, I was like, I think she's 30 years younger than what she's telling us. Anyway, I just really enjoy that vibrance. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know you over the years.
It's a pleasure being with you. I know I've shared this with others, but I so appreciate the way that you bring people out. Listening to your podcast is the same thing as what you were saying was your pleasure in talking to people. I get to listen to you connecting to people that are part of our community or our extended community, and it just creates even more ties, more threads, more of a sense of what do we all have in common, even if we're coming from different approaches. And you have such a lovely way of bringing that out and seeing what it is that we're sharing and how we may be different in a way that feels so welcoming. So thank you for your bringing that to me and for the way that you do it for our whole community.
Thank you. That's so touching. I'm feeling very touched. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, Marcia, this has been lovely, and I'm excited. I know we'll have you back. We always have the end of the year episodes, so you'll be back. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The NARM therapist training is a clinical training where you will be trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you learn and integrate NARM, you will receive individualized support and join an engaged professional community of therapists passionate about healing complex trauma. Learn more about this training and reserve your spot by visiting complextraumatrainingcenter.com. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.